Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's event. I'm Sam Peck. I'm the Executive Director of Family Councils of Ontario, and it's my extreme pleasure to welcome you to today's conference session. Our June 2022 virtual conference with the theme Regroup, Refocus, Recharge. We are marking Seniors Month and the past Family Council Week with an incredible lineup of speakers, including today's speaker, Dr. James Conklin. Before we go any further, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the land that I'm coming to you from. I'm based in Hamilton. It is situated upon the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. We're a remote team, and we work with people all across the province. And in that work, we encourage our team members, our service users, our partners to reflect on the ongoing legacy and impacts of colonialism and engage in meaningful reconciliation. We encourage everyone to visit this really great website, native-land.ca. And if you type in your address, you can learn a lot about the territory on which your home is situated. This month is also Indigenous History Month. And we hope that you will mark this month by learning more about the Indigenous peoples of your community and their history, and perhaps some of both the challenges and the joys that Indigenous communities near to you are facing and experiencing. The work that non-Indigenous people communities need to do towards reconciliation with Indigenous peoples is a long-term journey. It's specific to each individual, each organization, and it's constantly evolving for us. But we welcome you to join us on that journey. As you know, we're marking Seniors Month Family Council Week with education and networking sessions all month long. But today, it is my pleasure to introduce you to our guest speaker. James Conklin will speak on recent research concerning the integration of family caregivers into long-term care homes during the pandemic, and link these results to social science ideas of organizational change, and we'll raise ideas about how family councils, you folks, can act as catalysts for transformed and better relationships between families, residents, and staff in long-term care homes. Now, Dr. James Conklin is an author, educator, scientist, and consultant who specializes in the area of planned organizational change. He recently led a study of how communities of practice spread innovations in Ontario's health system, and is currently doing a study on how long-term care homes are coping with change during the COVID-19 pandemic. In addition to a book, Balancing Acts, A Human Systems Approach to Organizational Change, Dr. Conklin has authored or co-authored over 30 academic publications and has published op-eds with the Globe and Mail and Post Media. Without any further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Conklin to our virtual stage. As you listen to his session, pose your questions in the house-based chat, and we'll discuss at the end. Over to you, Dr. Conklin.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that, Sam. Clearly that introduction was written by my mother, and I'm not sure how she provided it to you, but thank you so much. I'm looking forward to spending a little bit of time with you and talking about my research. And as Sam said, I am an investigator leading an implementation science team here in the province of Ontario. Right now, my research has to do with plan change, and almost all of it has been located in the seniors health sector in Ontario, much of it involving long-term care. Okay, there. And so I'm hoping that you can see the slides as I change them. And right now, I just want to say that the work of our implementation science team has been a team effort, a group effort, a work of science, and also a labor of love. And we have been very generously supported by Healthcare Excellence Canada and also by the Centre for Aging and Brain Health Innovation at Baycrest in Toronto. And we thank them for their generous support. And I also want to recognize all of the people and organizations who have helped us over the past almost 2 years now. Thank them for their commitment and hard work. I'm showing you here the logos and names of some of the organizations that have been involved. And I also want to acknowledge the long-term care residents and family members who've been working with us. We've benefited greatly from the perspectives and hard work of 8 residents and family members who've made important and tangible contributions to our work. Okay, so I want to talk about what our research reveals about the important role played by family members in long-term care homes and about the growing realization that we need to change and improve things in Ontario's long-term care sector. I'm going to start by saying a few things about what was known about the role of families in long-term care before the pandemic, that is before, let's say, March 2020. And then I'm going to touch on the impact of the pandemic on long-term care, the research that has been done over the course of the pandemic. There's been a great deal of research activity since the onset of the pandemic. And also I'm going to talk about some of the findings from our research, and then I will close with some considerations of what we might now do in order to improve things. Okay. So to start with, before the pandemic, most people involved in long-term care before the pandemic said that they believed or they espoused that the care provided by families was important. And by late 2019, we had some appreciation for the role played by many family members, especially in providing emotional support and in monitoring care and in advocating on behalf of residents. We also knew that family relationships with staff were sometimes congenial, but too often these relationships were said to be challenging. All in all, the ambiguity inherent in long-term care homes, the fact that these places are both homes and also are very busy and highly regulated workplaces, this ambiguity spilled over to the place and position of family members in the homes. They were visitors, some sort of care was often provided, but this varied with family members and residents, but not too much work had been done to fully understand the nature and impact of this care provided by family. Family were said to be important, but this statement sometimes seemed to be something that people felt they should say without thinking too much about what the statement actually meant. We also knew, in part through the experiences and reports of family members, that there were gaps in the care being provided to many residents. Things were forgotten, activities were sometimes rushed, staffing changes meant that important knowledge or resident preferences and health conditions were sometimes lost sight of. And it was family members who often stepped in to try to fill those gaps by sharing information and sometimes even by helping to perform certain tasks. And some research was carried out before the pandemic that helped us to begin to understand the role played by families. And here you see some of the main findings that came out of some of this research that predates the pandemic. Family do a lot for long-term care residents, but what they do tends to remain invisible in the long-term care system. The value of the role is substantial, yet in a way, the role is not valued at all. It is unseen. This changed, arguably, in March 2020 when the first wave of COVID-19 hit Ontario. And in a way, a natural experiment began to take place at that time. Scientists use this term, natural experiment, to describe a situation where unexpected real-world events occur that can be looked at with scientific methods. In this case, family members before the pandemic were entering long-term care homes as usual. Then, with the pandemic, the homes were locked down and family were not able to enter. And then, some months later, the doors reopened and family members were allowed back in. So we could look at the previous situation before the pandemic, compare that to what happened when family were locked out, and then compare that to what happened when family were allowed back in. It was like a naturally occurring experiment. And so what did this experiment reveal? And here you see a summary of some of the key points that have been reported in a growing number of studies published in academic journals. Keeping families out of the homes had a negative impact on resident health and well-being. families were also negatively affected, and so were frontline workers in long-term care. Now, I want to talk about some of the findings that emerged from the project that my implementation science team carried out. We worked with 3 Ontario long-term care homes, 1 large urban nonprofit, 1 small municipal home in a small town, and 1 private home also in a small town. We carried out our project in partnership with a variety of Ontario organizations, including Family Councils Ontario. Our mandate was to support the 3 homes as they implemented what was called a designated care partner program that would allow certain designated family caregivers to enter the home during times of lockdown. And we were also asked to evaluate the success of this program and then to share the lessons that we learned. To do this, we used a method called developmental evaluation to support the homes, and we conducted an outcome evaluation to measure success. We also carried out a rapid scoping review early in 2021 to see if anything had been published in English anywhere around the world about family caregivers entering long-term care homes during pandemic conditions. And we conducted an Ontario-wide survey of family caregivers, asking them to tell us about themselves and about how they support their spouse or parent, because that is usually who the family caregiver supported living in long-term care. And we are now in the process of spreading the word about what we learned. I want to focus on 3 main points that emerged from our work, and you see these 3 points listed here on this slide. I'm going to dig into each of these points separately. So first of all, then, our findings show that the health and well-being of residents correlates with the presence of family members in the long-term care homes. As I've been saying repeatedly over the past several months at various meetings and conferences and presentations, our findings show that essential care partners, and that's the term that is often used to describe family members who are playing this role, essential care partners are indeed essential. That, I would say, is the main finding from our research. We saw declines in health and well-being and then improvements once family were allowed back in. And this data consists of specific observations and stories recounted by long-term care staff and family members. It was a visceral, concrete experience for the people who participated in our study. Staff saw what happened. They recounted specific stories about how, for example, a failing resident with dementia lit up when a family member who had been absent for many weeks suddenly was allowed back in and walked into the resident's room. We heard about how people living with dementia exhibited an increase in responsive behaviors when families were barred from the home, and about how these behaviors dramatically declined when family members were allowed back in. And very importantly, this was visceral, immediate, and concrete right in front of the eyes of staff members and of residents. Before the pandemic, the importance of family care was said to be invisible. Now it was suddenly visible front and center. We were also, in the data sets that we accumulated, we were deluged with troubling data about the experiences of residents and family before and during the pandemic. And to try to get this across, I'm going to read to you part of a paragraph from our analytical report that sums up some of these findings. This, I want to let you know, is difficult stuff. So prepare yourselves to hear some troubling descriptions. So here is the paragraph from the report. Many participants described concerns and problems that emanated from the long-term care home as a whole, including its policies, practices, management, and staff. One resident recited a litany of issues that were present both before and during the pandemic, including insufficient staff, lack of training, lack of supervision, PSWs poorly paid with no benefits, making it necessary for them to work in more than one home. Long-term care processes and systems were broken or even non-existent. We were told that family were excluded from care plans and the facilities can be dangerously disorganized, and that the participant had witnessed residents dying needlessly from inadequate wound care. One participant, reflecting on her decision to place her husband in a home, said, I was forced to abandon my husband to these people. These have been the darkest days of my life, and I doubt that I will ever recover completely. Many disturbing terms were used by our research participants: brutal, threats, inept, ageism, horrible, mistrust, and distress. Some homes respond only to complaints and engage in little or no communication with family. Some participants say they no longer try to engage fruitfully with the home because they have been rebuffed too many times. The overall tone of these comments is that families simply must function as advocates, and their advocacy is usually unwelcome and is often ignored. We have literally page after page after page of findings from of transcript data from the research that we did that are along these lines. I can tell you that it was extremely troubling and distressing to go through this material. Okay, so a lot of the data describes this challenging or difficult relationship that exists between many staff and family, and I find this worrying, given that it would seem that there ought to be a natural and congenial partnership between staff and family. They play complementary roles, mutually supportive roles, one would think, in that they both provide various forms of care to the residents, and their shared intention would seem to be to assure a good quality of life and health for residents. But instead, we heard reports of acrimony. Family members end up developing an informal role in long-term care, the role of advocate, specifically to try to make up for perceived gaps in care. Many family members are so upset by what they see happening that they end up concluding that frontline staff must be deficient in some way, incompetent or uncaring perhaps. But staff have their own stories to tell. They see themselves as working extremely hard to get through an extremely difficult workload each day, and they're unable to drop what they are doing to go and tend to a resident whose spouse or child is visiting and who is requesting some sort of service. Instead of partnership and understanding, there is often acrimony between these groups. I want to finish by sharing some thoughts on what might be done. And here I'm showing you some of the points that I want to raise and that I've heard raised on panels and discussions that I've participated over the past few months. I'm going to touch briefly on each of these points. People are talking about the need to transform, to make sweeping changes to long-term care. That is a bigger topic that I'm able to address today. The people who are calling for this level of change are suggesting that we look to other countries for alternative models of care for our elderly, that we put more emphasis on care provided in the community so that people can stay and continue to live in their own homes, and that we consider how we might reach the often stated goal of providing 4 hours of daily basic care to each resident in a long-term care home. The current rate, by the way, is closer to 2 hours. These discussions are underway and they are important, but I want to focus on the possibility of changing and improving conditions in our current model, in the current infrastructure of hundreds of Ontario long-term care homes across this province. They are probably not going to go away anytime soon, and given our recent experiences, it seems to me that some of our efforts need to go into improving things for residents in these existing homes. And the findings from our research and the research conducted by other scientific teams are reasonably clear. We need to create better work conditions and salaries for PSWs who provide the basic daily care, and we need to hire more PSWs to share the heavy workload that is currently being experienced. It's important to emphasize this point because some might suggest that the solution is to encourage family members to provide more care, now that that care has become more visible to people, to encourage family to provide more care free of charge and to continue to fill the gaps that we currently are experiencing. That is not the solution that my team favors. We do not think that the proper response to overworking PSWs is to now start to overwork family members. No, we need more PSWs, and we need to compensate them at a level that is appropriate for the difficulty and importance of their work, and we need to work at creating a more congenial and productive workplace environment. And there are some other things that we should consider. Arguably, Ontario has placed an enormous emphasis on creating accountability in long-term care, and it's done this with an onerous compliance regime. Compliance officers enforce the rules, and homes are penalized if they're found to be non-compliant. But we're doing this in an environment that depends on relational care, relationships between caregivers and care seekers, and relationships between the different caregiving roles are tremendously important. If we see positive supportive relationships, then we see an environment where people are working together, where they are able to learn and innovate when needed, to tailor the care to the needs of specific residents. I assert that we need more emphasis on this relational side of care, on learning and innovation, and perhaps a little less emphasis on compliance. This may seem like a small thing, but the province is so heavily invested in its compliance regime that it may be difficult to achieve the rebalancing that some of us are hoping for. And related to this, we need to transform the current atmosphere of acrimony between staff and family. We need to eliminate the need for families to take on an unwanted role as the angry advocate on behalf of residents, and more toward a spirit of partnership and improvement. Imagine a long-term care home where you have frequent opportunities to collaborate with the staff who provide the daily care for your relative, when you don't feel the need to complain, to stir things up and advocate, where everyone instead is working together. In brief, our findings indicate that the pandemic has created a new situation in some homes where staff appreciate and value the role of family that has become more visible, and where family appreciate the good intentions of staff, and that both find the existing situation to be unacceptable. Our findings indicate that many staff in long-term care homes have a new and deeper appreciation for the role of family caregivers. This was very evident in our developmental evaluation data, in which long-term care staff noted the spike in responsive behaviors when lockdown was imposed in the spring of 2020, and the drop in responsive behaviors when family were allowed back into the homes. Staff also reported witnessing specific interactions which reinforced for them the importance of family presence in homes. Family reported their frustrations at seeing the state of the residents they supported during the pandemic, and most comment, or at least many commented, on how structural and systemic factors prevented staff from providing better care. In other words, most families saw long-term care staff as having good intentions that they were unable to act upon. Staff, especially PSWs and family, provide much of this day-to-day basic and psychosocial care needed by residents. Our findings, for example, indicate that most spouses who act as family caregivers visit daily for more than 2 hours, and most children who act as family caregivers visit up to 3 times per week for up to 2 hours per visit. Our findings also show that in the current situation in long-term care, family members frequently report resident needs to long-term care staff and notice that no action is taken. As a result, many family members state that they must take on this informal advocacy role. They advocate on part of the resident when resident needs are or seem to be ignored. This creates an acrimonious us against them mindset. In fact, it's as though the informal caregiving regime that is necessitated by the shortcomings of the long-term care status quo is augmented by an informal compliance regime. Compliance officers perform the formal compliance function, trying to ensure that long-term care homes comply with ministry-imposed rules, but family members are performing an informal compliance function, trying to ensure that the needs of specific residents are attended to. Our findings suggest that the acrimony that currently characterizes too many staff-family relationships is produced by the situation in long-term care, not by personalities or traits. When lockdown was most severe, the acrimony was especially evident and intense. When lockdowns were eased and families were given more freedom within the homes, the acrimony was much less evident. Our findings indicate that most staff and families share a common goal of providing the best possible care and support for residents. Under the current circumstances, staff sometimes find that when family interrupt their workflow, they are unable to perform all of their needed basic care duties. And similarly, families sometimes find that staff, in the rush to complete all of their tasks, have not noticed a new specific issue that has arisen in the case of a specific resident. Both are pursuing the same goal, but at times they do so at cross purposes. Staff and family both report on the importance of the care provided by the other and note that the current situation at times works poorly. So to sum up, staff have a new and deeper appreciation of the importance of family. It's more visible to them. Family appreciate the good intentions of staff and recognize the importance of staff-provided care. And both staff and family express frustration with the current situation. Many organizational change theorists point out that dissatisfaction with the current situation is a kind of launching pad for sustainable organizational change. And our findings show considerable dissatisfaction with the current situation, an appreciation of the importance of care provided by both staff and family, and a shared desire to make things better. My team suggests that the cost of improving the staff-family relationships are probably manageable. That's why we argue that conditions are favorable to strengthen the natural partnership that exists between family and frontline care providers. And not surprisingly, our data indicates that there are those who believe that family councils could play a useful role in any process to improve the quality and life of residents in long-term care. One of our large qualitative data sets was analyzed using a theming process, and one of the themes that emerged from this process was this: family councils are or could be a useful resource to support families and residents. Now, this was not the strongest theme in the data because much of the data had to do with family members talking about their disappointment in what was happening in the homes during the pandemic. But when they started to talk about what things might be done to bring about improvement, family councils was one of the things that they mentioned. One person stated that family councils provide a critical link and safety mechanism for resident care, especially where some residents don't have family nearby or family is absent from care. Another agreed with this characterization of the council, saying the family council has also been a strong support for caregivers, providing information and an opportunity to talk to family members of other residents and share information and experiences. And another said the family council meetings are a place to discuss items of common interest and expressed a wish that the home prioritize opportunities for family member input and advocacy. Family councils are an existing proven structure within Ontario long-term care homes that can act as a gateway to the views of family members and might also be used to bring family into any future improvement processes. I want to end with 4 principles that are based on recent and enduring findings in the science of organizational change and that could help us to ensure that change processes are consistent with known factors that promote success in efforts to bring about positive change. I'm going to go through these one by one. First, reduce reliance on compliance. So far, successive Ontario governments have put considerable emphasis on the creation and maintenance of a province-wide compliance regime. Basically, this is how we have structured the social and task milieus of long-term care. We create pages and pages of rules. We hire a small army of compliance inspectors. We make surprise inspections of homes and we look for rules that are being broken. When we find errors, we document them on public websites and we require that the home correct the errors within a certain amount of time. The trouble is, structuring influences behavior, sometimes in surprising ways. In my book, Balancing Acts, I present a model of an organizational system consisting of conjoined patterns of thought and behavior that feed into and are also influenced by a process of structuring. Structuring influences and stables patterns of behavior. So the question is, what sort of behavior is likely to emerge in a long-term care home where so much emphasis is on rules and compliance? Will we see innovation and individualized care, or will we see rule-following behavior? It seems to me that we are likely to see people trying hard to follow the rules and to earn the tick marks that are placed in the compliance checklist, and that at times this could come at the cost of compassion and person-centered care. After all, we've been using compliance regimes for decades, and for decades, over the decades, we had created a long-term care system that during the early months of the pandemic produced the most catastrophic results in the Western world. Albert Einstein is reputed to have said, "Insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results." Things have gone very wrong in our long-term care sector. Why then are we calling for more compliance, more rules, more inspectors? I'm suggesting that we need to stop putting so many eggs just in the compliance basket. Point number 2, involve families, residents, and frontline care workers in any efforts to bring about positive change. As we prepare ourselves to design and implement improvements in our long-term care sector, we must recognize that the hundreds of long-term care homes and their thousands of residents, family members, and workers make up a complex human system. There is mind-boggling diversity throughout this system in different situations prevailing in different homes. A top-down, uniform command and control approach to change is not going to produce the results we hope for. We need to create a collaborative approach. We need to invite all of the key stakeholders to the decision-making table, and this includes residents and their families. It also includes frontline workers, such as personal support workers, therapeutic recreation staff, and social workers. We need to work on these improvements together. We need to talk things over, weigh alternatives, and try things out. The work calls for an alliance, a coalition of partners, and democratic and participative processes. Third, we need to focus efforts on local circumstances and specific homes. This means that we need to recognize that the homes that make up this complex system across the province are dealing with their own unique circumstances and situations. It means that these homes need to be able to establish their own teams, identify their own objectives, and work together to achieve those objectives. Rather than emphasizing compliance, we need to emphasize empowerment. Central leaders at the top of bureaucratic pyramids may feel uneasy with the amount of delegation and empowerment that is needed to bring about these changes, but I have faith in their ability to adapt, to recognize that their role is going to be one of facilitation and coaching, to act as the nurturers of networks that allow people in local communities to access resources and expertise when they need to. If the homes and the people in them are able to set goals that are most meaningful to them, the commitment to the change will be supercharged. And fourth and finally, we need to create a social learning environment so that local teams in long-term care homes can learn from and with each other. The local teams working in individual homes will need to be linked together in some kind of learning collaboratives. Team members will want to be able to meet with other teams from other homes from time to time to share objectives, to describe their experiences and the challenges they've encountered, and to share the solutions that they have arrived at or that they're experimenting with. These collaboratives will create what is known as a social learning process that allows the teams to cross-fertilize each other with new ways of thinking and innovative ways of overcoming challenges. Here in Canada, we have tons of experience in creating environments for social learning. We have lots of experience with communities of practice and with knowledge networks. The time has come to draw on this experience, to balance compliance with empowerment, to design breakthrough participative processes, and to allow teams of committed Canadians to create the long-term care homes that our elders deserve. Thank you so much for your attention, and that is the end of my presentation.
Hi everyone. May not be surprise, surprise. Sam, can I trouble you to unmute your mic, please? Excuse me as I disappear to the back.
And I was brilliant too, so I'll have to start all over again. It was raining really heavily in the background, so I muted myself until the storm passed. So what I was saying is that, so thank you for such a great session. And I think where there's so much value in work like this is not only looking at what has been, but what can be. So highlighting where this research can actually inform future policy action, engagement from those within the sector, those who care. So my first question is one that I know is a bit of a hot topic in the sector, and that's the compliance regime that you touched on at a few points. people are concerned about homes being in compliance with the legislation so that they're safe, free from abuse, residents are getting the nutrition, et cetera, everything that they need. The legislation in Ontario is quite intense. So, and we hear about only a few or a handful of proactive inspections being done, and that inspections focus only on the negative issues without providing homes much support to improve, to reach compliance. So what would rebalancing compliance with that learning look like? What do you think are some of the ways that would actually improve that system?
That's a really good question, Sam, and it's certainly true that that there has been a tremendous amount of emphasis placed on compliance for more than 2 decades now at this point, I would say. And it's not attributable to any particular political party or any particular government. It's been passed on from government to government. So it's really baked into the system right now. So I want to say, first of all, that I'm a fan of accountability. I think it's important for people to be accountable and to be responsible for the work that they do and for producing the results that they need to produce. But I'm not a fan of over-reliance on compliance, and I think that that's possibly where we've gotten to. So I'm talking about, imagining that there is a compliance basket that we've put too many of our eggs in, maybe even almost all of our eggs. And I'd like us to move some eggs over into, what do you want to call it? A learning and innovation basket or something like that, so that more emphasis is placed elsewhere. People who do my kind of work, one of the things that we've learned is that when an organization or a system designs and implements an intervention that is intended to bring about some sort of positive improvement, one prediction that we can make is that there are going to be some unintended consequences of this intervention. It's invariable. In fact, a social scientist a number of decades ago named Merton ended up articulating what he called the law of unintended consequences, trying to get it across that this is so pervasive, so frequent, so universal that we could even call it a law, that there will be, in complex human systems, inevitably unintended consequences. And some of my work has been as an ethnographer in long-term care homes, where over a considerable period of time, I'm immersed in the home and watching what's happening. And I've had the opportunity to see some of the unintended consequences that can come about through an over-reliance on compliance regimes. I'm sure many of the people participating in your conference here in June have had similar experiences. So what might we do? It seems to me that one of the things that maybe needs to happen then is the creation of, or the increasing support of, other structures, other programs, other initiatives within the long-term care sector that move some of the emphasis over to learning and innovation and change. So, for example, I remember thinking a number of years ago when Health Quality Ontario got started, and Health Quality Ontario was quite active in the long-term care sector. I kept an eye on that for a little while, thinking this could be the antidote that we're looking for, that could move some emphasis and rebalance things a little bit, that could bring about more positive change. And I think it did, to some extent, bring some fresh air into the system, but it didn't go far enough, I don't think. And so I really do think that the time has come for us to seek that rebalancing. And one of the reasons why I'm so happy to be here with you today, Sam, and with the people involved in the conference, is that one of the things that I think is needed is for the voice of families to be heard more, And it does seem to me that family councils are a way to make that happen. And so it's my hope that as family councils, members of family councils, families who are acting as advocates, whether they wanted to or not, many of them have taken on this advocacy role, start thinking about how, yes, we need some additional forces at work within long-term care homes to promote learning and well-being, and not merely the kind of tick box compliance that sometimes seems to be a little overemphasized.
And I think that also speaks to something else that's on the radar is really quality improvement, is looking at how families, residents, and councils, actually in the Fixing Long-Term Care Act, should be consulted on quality improvement measures. And I think that that can go a long way towards elevating some of those, those smaller issues that are meaningful, very meaningful to the resident and family experience and staff experience, but looking at it as, we know this to be true, but what can we do better? So looking at really improving quality and coming up with, metrics that are meaningful, not just measuring everything for the sake of it, but really what are meaningful measures to keep track of. So that's definitely something that that's, I think, of interest to families and councils are figuring out going into the fall of how to use those voices, because not only are our caregivers and council members family members, but they have had a wealth of life lived professional volunteer experience that they can contribute to the sector, their families, and there's also researchers, teachers, lawyers, doctors, retail professionals who can contribute. So the next question, I think, really speaks to your point around the animosity in that relationship breakdown, and how it's always existed, that some tension, but made so much worse during the pandemic. Now, so we know, and I'm sure you do too, that many families have, they experience guilt, frustration, anger, relief when their person transitions to long-term care. So what would you suggest in terms of best practices or experience in helping families navigate those feelings so that they're not misplaced or misdirected towards the home staff, those frontline workers who are doing their best day in and day out, who work in long-term care because they like it, because it's not the most glamorous or well-paid sector, but how can we help families with that journey so it doesn't create negative relationships?
Okay, so I love that question, Sam, and I'm not sure you're going to love my answer, but here it is. The thing is that we know through very good social science research, we know that human beings, when they see a situation that is negative in some way and that they don't like, they have a natural tendency to look for someone to blame. They tend to look for individual people to hold responsible for faulty systems. But the thing is that those faulty systems are going to continue to be faulty regardless of what people happen to be populating them, because, and this is what is meant when we talk about systemic factors. It's because the system has a sort of life of its own, and it tends to just enroll people into the sort of dynamics and forces that are unfolding in the system. So to try to answer your question, how do we, the way that I look at it is, how do we help family members to see that the problems that they may be encountering in the long-term care home are not primarily the fault of individual people working in the homes? Those individual people instead are also subject to the problems that are being experienced by the residents. So how do we do that? Well, we tell them that. We, and that's another thing that family councils could possibly help to do, by talking about the fact that there are limitations in the way that we have set up our long-term care system, the way that we fund the system, the way that we measure performance in the system. There are limitations that are affecting the performance of people working in the system. One of those things, I'm sure you hear about this quite frequently. One of these things is this idea that's been around for a while, based on research, that it's likely that in order to be more assured of the well-being of people living in long-term care homes, we need to be providing an average about 4 hours of basic care every day. And studies are indicating that here in Ontario, we're providing closer to about 2 hours of basic care every day. So, family members realize that, wow, we are so far short of the target right now, And the people, just notice this, the people that often tend to get blamed for the problems are the PSWs, but they are the least powerful in the system. They're not the ones making the decisions about resource allocation. In the ethnography that I was referring to earlier, in the home that I was in, PSWs were each looking after 8 residents. So, and this, if you don't know, this is a very heavy workload.
Mhm.
I literally watched people running from task to task during the day shift as they tried to provide an adequate level of care for the residents. So I guess it's a matter of educating, sharing information, and trying to nurture and support that natural alliance between, let's say, the frontline workers and family members who have the well-being of the resident closest to their hearts, but they're dealing with a situation that makes it very, very difficult to provide for that well-being.
Yeah, absolutely. And PSWs, and we hear this from a lot of families as well, is that they know that we want the same thing. PSWs don't want to be running from task to task. They want time to sit with a resident and have a cup of tea and chat. They want time to provide a more pleasurable bathing experience or help at a mealtime. But the system, as you pointed out, is the problem. And sure, there might be some bad actors in the system, but by and large, it is the restrictions, the challenges, and the barriers that are creating the problems, not individuals. So I think that's something that a lot of families know, but I'm sure that right now a reminder or a refresher can go a long way. And along with that is, we know that families and staff alike are experiencing compassion fatigue, that we're living through a global pandemic. There, for racialized, for Black and Indigenous folks, there is continued unearthing of residential school graves, police violence reports, the one that just came out in Toronto, for example. So there's a lot of weight in the world right now. So how, given all of that, how can we support home staff in being motivated and empowered allies, partners in care after all that they've experienced? So what are some ways to really mobilize, engage, empower those frontline staff?
Okay, so again, another great question, and my answer is going to be a little unorthodox, I think, because based on the work that I have done and the work that others have done in trying to bring about positive, sustainable organizational and system change, one of the things that we have determined is that the solutions, the ideas for change should be coming from the people most involved in the processes, involved in these systems. That's where the ideas are going to come from. The people involved in the day-to-day experience of long-term care, residents in long-term care, families, staff, and so on. Those people have the intimate knowledge of what's going on in these systems and are going to produce the best ideas for how to bring about change. So my answer is, it's not so much, I don't want to try to contribute an idea like, here's part of a solution, or here's the solution. Rather, I would say that what we need to do is start accessing the knowledge and experience of the people who intimately know what is going on. So we need to start accessing the knowledge and experience of family members, of residents themselves, of PSWs, of social workers, of therapeutic recreational staff, and others who were there on the floors every day, seeing what's going on, noticing what the difficulties are. We need, you might say, structured, facilitative processes that allow these groups of people together to share data, share information about what's going on, then come to a shared understanding of what that information means, and then develop some priorities and some action plans for bringing about change. So earlier you talked about the importance of quality assurance processes. There are tons of known quality assurance processes that are designed specifically to make that kind of thing happen. So when I talk about empowerment, that's what I mean. We need to get the people on the front lines more involved in in arriving at a shared understanding of what's going on, but then also formulating and then implementing the improvement plans.
Yeah, so flip the script, start at the grassroots level, and then, I'll put my take on it, that the role of leadership is to facilitate that and draw it up, not impose downwards what should be done, but to listen to the people who are living it. Because if they know what the problems are, chances are they also have really good solutions.
Yeah.
So absolutely love it. So let's see, a couple other questions that we have coming up. Just going to double check. So something that is around maybe a bit of process and, bringing those ideas forward. So family councils are going to be engaged in quality improvement starting in soon. Many already have been going back some time. But what do you have any resource recommendations or things that families can start reading, reviewing now to really get them in the right space with the knowledge, interests, whatever it is, to really engage in meaningful quality improvement efforts? How do we help build capacity among families and councils to do that work?
Okay, so one thing I can say is that back when Health Quality Ontario still existed under that banner, it had a lot of really good usable resources about basic quality assurance techniques. Now, I haven't visited their site in a while, but I believe that they still exist. They've been sort of changed a little bit. They have a new name now, and I believe maybe they are located somewhere differently, but the resources themselves, my understanding is that they still exist and are still accessible. So, this is a contribution that Family Councils Ontario could possibly make by conducting an inventory of simple to use resources to bring about improvement in long-term care homes and make those available to family councils. There's also I've forgotten the name of it now, but there's an organization in the United States, in Massachusetts, the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, I think it's called. That would be another organization that almost certainly has a repository of tools and processes and approaches that could be used to bring about positive change and change that is brought about through the engagement of many different people in change processes. So, and here's another thought. Once again, through existing family councils in the province, it might be possible to offer a slate of speakers willing to go and speak to specific family councils about ways to get involved in positive change processes, how to make proposals to the home about bringing about change, and how to seek a partnership with homes in bringing about change. One thing that I think is here's a challenge to consider, and this is something that became evident in our work, where we partnered with individual residents and family members to help us with the work that we did over the last couple of years. And one of the things that sadly happened was that the residents that these family members were supporting in a couple of cases passed away. And so now this family member who is so active in our research, they don't have that, that immediate visceral connection, you might say, that would keep them involved in our work. And as you were saying before, there was this compassion fatigue that people are experiencing. Maybe they just want to go away and not be involved anymore. What we found was that in 2 cases, at least, people who were no longer supporting family asked to remain active in our project. And so I'm very curious about that how do organizations like Family Council Ontario harness this expertise gained through experience by people who have been involved in long-term care because their parents, their spouses have been there. Now they're not there. How do we keep them involved so they can continue to contribute? Clearly, people are willing to do that. And is there some way to kind of roll out the welcome mat and try to make sure that we keep that experience and knowledge when it's so advanced and so useful?
And many family councils do keep people on after their loved one has passed if they're willing to do so. I know some homes have engaged past families in quality improvement or committees or volunteer work so that we do keep that knowledge, that passion, that insight. Families make long-term care communities their homes too. We hear it's a second home. I spend as much time here as I do, active at my own private home. So it's no wonder that people stick around, whether they've had a wonderful experience and want to continue that, or looking for areas for improvement. It's completely understandable. Last question: what's next for research? What are you excited about the potential for? What gaps are there? What do you want to do next?
Okay, so in terms of this work, we're very happy that the Centers for Learning, Research and Innovation, the Ottawa-based Center for Learning, Research and Innovation in Long-Term Care, has expressed a desire to continue to partner with our implementation science team for about another year to continue to take our work forward. And so one of the things that particular group is going to be doing is trying to bring a straightforward, usable process, make it available to long-term care homes, family councils, and others that are interested in how to strengthen the relationship between family and the homes. So that's one thing that we're going to continue to be working on. And as part of that, you heard me talk about the importance of using social learning processes and learning collaboratives as a way to bring about change. Now, the reason why that's so important is that when we are trying to change and improve things in a complex system, it is, as I said earlier, impossible to predict everything that's going to happen. So we need to have a process where people are learning together. We're trying things out, gathering data about what's happening, and then sorting out the positive impacts that we're producing, but also noticing any negative impacts that we're producing so we can then change the implementation process as we are going. This sort of thing can be done through a learning collaborative approach. And so one of the things that we're planning on doing is working with 2 existing Ontario learning collaboratives to try to understand what makes them tick and what allows them to be successful, to see if it might be possible to produce some sort of a template that could be accessed by others and used to set up their own learning collaboratives in other parts of the province dealing with different aspects of long-term care.
That's great, because we don't want to reinvent the wheel. If something is working, there's a process, especially long-term care, where people are already overwhelmed and overworked. If we can provide, happy to participate and partner, make it easy for people, make it doable, give them the confidence, the capacity, the tools to do this, we'll have a better sector. It'll take time, but we'll be able to do it. So this hour has flown by, and it has been a sincere pleasure. Dr. Conklin, I know that our attendees have some things to take away from them, some ideas, some inspiration. And having been involved in some of your work, I am very excited to see what comes next, because I do think that it has so much value to the long-term care system and to improving people's lives. Because while people are the ones who created the system, we're also the ones who can change it. So thank you so much for your time, your passion, and your expertise today and in general. And for those who have tuned in, check out the resources that have been mentioned. We'll put links in our resources section and follow-up materials. So start thinking, how can you help to improve quality in your loved one's home, in your long-term care home, and look at complex systems and how we created them and how we can change them. So again, thank you so much, Dr. Conklin, for your time with us today, and best of luck with everything in the future.
Thank you so much, Sam. I appreciate the invitation, and have a great conference, everybody.
Thank you.